Hey, what's up? It's Jared with Ditch Auto, and these are the top 5 settings that I changed immediately after getting my A7R III. And I've even made a few little refinements to these settings. There are settings that I've always changed, and I've made this video in the past for other cameras of mine. As the cameras continue to change and they add new features and change the way some features work, it's changed the settings that I change when I initially get the camera. Some of them are very consistently the same, and so I wanted to talk about what those are and some of the new settings that I've adjusted on the A7R III to just make it a good fit for me. Now, these are settings that I find work best for my shooting style and for the way that my mind works and the way I've trained kind of my muscle memory and my hands and whatnot when I'm shooting. These are just the best features for me. It's not going to be perfect for everybody, but if you are relatively new to photography or new to using these cameras, you might give these settings a try and see if they work for you. So the first thing that I do is change the focus area. The focus area is basically, you can get to it by hitting the function key, going over to focus area. Sometimes some of these custom buttons will be configured to them, where people will configure their custom buttons to them, but by default they're not. But you tap on the function key and then go to focus area. Now, by default, your camera might be in focus area wide or zone. Basically, what wide does is it uses a large portion of your sensor to grab focus or to look for focus. And so it's looking for things that would be in that area. Now, for me, I have always struggled with making sure that the right thing is in focus. And when I shoot a lot of weddings or events, there might be a lot of people in the scene or a lot of different things going on, and I want to make sure the camera doesn't make a mistake, because it's not very often that I'm shooting something where I have multiple tries. Like, I may be shooting a wedding and I'm trying to get a shot of the bride and groom kissing, and I don't want the camera to accidentally focus on their officiant or their pastor that's behind them. I want the focus on them. And with face detection and some of those other things that these cameras have, it may accidentally go and focus on something else. When I'm shooting an event, I may be shooting a crowd shot and I'm really focused on one person who keeps having maybe a nice smile, and I want that shot of that person, but there's so many other faces in the scene that the camera ends up choosing another face, and then that person's out of focus. So even though face detection and all that stuff has gotten really good, and in this camera face detection is actually amazing, sometimes it can mess you up. And so I switch my focus settings to the focus area and then the flexible spot, and I can choose large, medium, or small in this. And what's nice about that is that if I'm shooting a face and I'm more close up, I may choose for a focus area small, or if I'm shooting something a bit further away that's bigger, and I want to make sure that I have more room for movement, I may use the focus area or the focus spot large. But most of the time I'm in medium. It's like a good all-around size, and you can see the little square right here, and I can actually tap around on the screen and move this focus point around, or I can use the multi-select tool, the little joystick, to kind of move it around as well. Now, one of the things that I have done is, well, I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit later. But anyways, by default, your camera, if you press this down, it will actually recenter that into the middle. So even if it's way off over here, you press it down, it centers it. I don't really like that. I'm going to talk about why I changed that a little bit later. So number 2 is back button focus. Now, by default, when we press the shutters down a little bit on our camera, it will start to focus. It basically turns on autofocus. And as long as you have this pressed down a little bit, your camera is autofocusing. And then when you let off, it should stop autofocusing. Now, the problem with that is that, like I talked about in the last point, I'm often shooting things that I'm waiting for a moment or something like that that might happen really fast. So I have my finger on the shutter ready to go. I'm not pressing down and taking pictures, but I have my finger down on the shutter or ready on the shutter. Now, I don't want focus to start happening there. I want the camera to do nothing. I want this shutter button to essentially do one thing, which is to take pictures. Now, considering we have this AF on button back here, we can use this button for autofocus. So we can disable autofocus on the shutter, so the shutter does no form of autofocusing, and we can use the AF on button on the back. So when I'm shooting, I have my index finger on the shutter, and I have my thumb right by the AF on button, and I put the camera up to my face. I of course, have my focus point selected properly, and I push that autofocus button down, and as soon as it turns green, letting me know that I pulled focus, I can actually let my finger off of that button and then just be ready to shoot. Now, if I'm doing something where I'm following action or following movement, I just hold that AF on button down the entire time. And by holding that AF on button down, it keeps autofocus going, and as I'm moving around, it's adjusting autofocus and reconfiguring that for me, which is great. And it's really fast at doing that. So using that button on the back definitely helps me out, because I'm not accidentally going and losing my autofocus, because sometimes it searches and I don't like it going and doing that search when I'm trying to get an actual shot. Now, some Sony lenses have AF lock on the side of the lenses, which is great, because I can essentially, even if I have autofocus going, I could pull autofocus, I can hold down on that button, and then I can tap the shutter button all I want, and it's not going to autofocus because I have that AF lock on. But not all Sony lenses have that, and for example, on this 85mm G Master, if I'm shooting in portrait mode, that's all the way down here. It's not easy. I can't, what am I going to push it with the palm of my hand? It's not easy to get to that button. So I don't necessarily like to rely on that button. I like to just disable autofocus from naturally happening when I touch the shutter button. So in order to do that, we're going to go into our menu, and we're on the first panel. So on the first panel here of options, we're going to move over to our autofocus, and then we get to AF with shutter, which is down here below. And so AF with shutter we want set to off, because that means that autofocus with shutter is not going to happen, and your only way of autofocusing then is going to be with the AF on button, which is exactly what I want. Now there is another option called pre-AF, which by default on this camera is set to off. Pre-AF essentially lets the camera do its own searching. So if I have pre-AF on, it's basically like continual autofocus. Like the camera, I'm not touching anything right now, and it is autofocusing after a little bit of time. So I don't want it to do that. Obviously, that's just as bad as having the shutter button pre-AF when I press that down. I just want AF on. Back button autofocus is how I get sharp focus, and I get what I want in focus every single time, because I'm taking a little bit of the guesswork away from the camera and allowing myself to take control over that. So image preview is another thing that comes turned off by default. Now, when I was shooting DSLRs, and I've talked about this in other videos, you go and take a shot and you look at the camera to see if you got the shot. You go and take another shot and then you look at the back of the camera. Now, on Sony cameras, you don't have to do that, because you have your EVF right here. This is essentially like looking at the back of the screen. So when you take a photo, you can see an image preview of that photo here. And unless I'm out shooting, just kind of running and gunning, and I don't have time to preview my images, I want an image preview. I want to at least be able to see if I got the shot. So turning on image playback or image preview means that after I take a photo, so I'm going to take a photo, and then I get that image preview here for 2 seconds. I have it enabled to give me that preview for 2 seconds. Now, it's going to do that in the EVF as well, which is exactly where I want it. That means that I could be shooting, so I'm shooting photos, and I can see my preview in the eyepiece here, which means I don't have to do that chimping, that looking at the back of the screen, throwing my neck out and my shoulders because I keep going back and forth to the camera. I can keep my eye up on the camera, and I can see all of my images that I'm shooting here. Now, if I shoot a range of images, like right now I have it in continuous shot, so if I shoot continuously, so we'll go ahead and pull focus, it's only giving me the preview or the playback of the last image that it captured, which means that if I'm shooting in continuous, I'm trying to follow my action, I'm able to follow my action because the blackout is very minimal when you're shooting. The shutter closing and opening is very minimal, and I'm not really missing anything. So even if I go into high continuous shooting, high plus mode, so I'm going to go ahead and do that and pull focus. It's almost no blackout at all in high plus continuous shooting. So that's definitely really nice. And then, of course, right now it's writing all of those photos. But having that image playback is important to me because I need to see if I got the shot really quickly and be able to continue on taking more photos. That's important when I'm shooting a wedding or something like that. So in order to get an image playback, you need to go into menu, go to the second panel there. So the second panel and the seventh, which is display auto review, and go down to auto review and turn that on to 2 seconds. So let me get back to that. I made a little mistake there. Auto review 2 and turn it on to 2 seconds. Right now it's currently set to off when I got the camera out of the box. So setting it to 2 seconds gives you that playback. I think that that's extremely important just so that you can check your shots and make sure that you got your shots. Now, the fourth thing that I kind of alluded to at the very beginning is changing what happens when I hit the center button on the multi-select. Now, by default, your multi-select, when you press it in, is actually going to center. Now, there's two different ways, and I've done this two different ways before. I with my A9, you can set it so that when you press down on the center, it takes you to your focus area. So I could switch between the flexible spot size. To me, I find that most useful. But a lot of times it's not any harder than just using your custom 2 button, which by default comes to the same thing. So to me, I don't want to have to feel around for other buttons. I'm often changing my flexible spot size. And so by remapping the center button so that I can just quickly go back and forth between those two without having to fumble around for any other buttons is important to me. I'm not often needing to recenter my focus point into the center of the screen. And if I really wanted to, I can remap that to like the trash can button or something like that, which by default is set to turning touch operation on and off. So you can remap your buttons around a little bit in order to achieve what you're looking for. To do that, we're going to go back into our menu, and we're on the second pane still, and we're going to go to custom key, to the second of that, multi-select custom button, and change that to focus area. By changing that to focus area, it's now going to allow me to change my focus area really easily without fumbling around for other buttons. So number 5 is something that I change on every single Sony camera that I have, and that's the function of ISO with the control wheel. So by default, you have to tap on the right side of your control wheel to get into ISO, and it takes you into this ISO menu, essentially, where you can control ISO. Now, I don't like that because I like the fact that there is a wheel up here for aperture, there's a wheel back here for your shutter speed, and the wheel back here should be for ISO, because a lot of times I have my shutter speed kind of set, maybe I'm at like 1/200th or 1/250th of a second, and I'm doing most of the changes to my exposure by using my aperture and my ISO. With these cameras being so good in lower light situations, you can use the ISO for a lot more than you used to be able to. So I don't want to have to press to the side to get to my ISO. I think that that's a pain in the butt to have to do that. Changing your ISO should be much faster than that, and you should be able to do it without having to even position your thumb in a way to where it's tapping on the right side of the control wheel. So go into menu, we're still in that custom operations section, and I can go into custom key, and control wheel is the first one, and I just simply change it to ISO. And I think by default it isn't even set to anything. And so if you set it to ISO, now when I adjust my ISO, notice my ISO number is changing right here, and I don't go into another menu and lose sight of what I have going on. Even when I'm looking through the viewfinder here and I'm changing my ISO, it's allowing me to see everything. Nothing's moving, nothing's changing. I could just see nicely. I don't have to go into that ISO menu anymore. So with that said, those are the 5 things that I change. There's a lot of other things that I change in the camera, like I shoot RAW plus JPEG all the time. It's just a habit. There are other little settings that I change, but they're really not too terribly important. These are the ones that I find provide the most value for me in using this camera. So let me know what you think. I know I was a little long-winded in this video, as I am with a lot of them, so I apologize to those of you that get frustrated by that. But thanks so much for sticking it out. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more A7R III content. We have a lot more stuff coming out soon, so make sure to click that subscribe button. Head on over to ditchauto.com where there's a lot more content available. And if you want to learn how to get out of automatic mode and start shooting in manual, make sure to check out our free Ditch Auto course. I've got a link to that down in the description below. That's going to do it, so thanks so much for checking out this video, and we hope to see you back here soon on Ditch Auto.